Welcome to Finance Files, a podcast hosted by best friends Brittany Carter and Whitney Coford, with occasional appearances from Whit's dad, Greg Coford, and other guests.
We talk about all things finance, including investing, trading, economics, capital markets, and business management. Learn the investor mindset with us.
Disclaimer, this podcast is not investment advice. This is purely for entertainment purposes. Here is your first lesson in finance. Don't believe anything anyone says forthright. Always do your own research. All materials are the individual's own opinions and do not necessarily represent the views of any other entities or persons that may be mentioned.
We're your hosts. I'm Whit.
And I'm Britt.
And today we're talking about personal budgeting and personal finance. So since it's typically Market Monday, I guess we could start with talking about general market. I think the only update I really had was, and Brittany, I think you may have seen this or sent it to me, but since we talked about Spirit Airlines in a previous week, it's kind of an interesting update that they recently announced that they're going into bankruptcy. So that week that we talked about Spirit, we advised that neither of us would have invested, and so good call on us. So as far as Market Monday goes, that's the only update I have. Britt, did you have anything you wanted to add?
If we want to talk about general trends, I think one thing that's super fascinating is looking at how AI is shaping a lot of the market. So I just read an article this morning about how a lot of private equity firms are essentially purchasing businesses, particularly in the services sector. And then they're leveraging AI tools such as like AI-based customer service, automating certain rote tasks, and they're able to essentially like double the margins through increased automation for a lot of these businesses. So it was kind of interesting. And then just looking at private equity as a whole, private equity has been this weird space. One thing that we talked about when we were talking about public investing is this sense of accountability, right? Like they are required to disclose what they're working on, how they're utilizing their funds. There's a level of accountability that comes with public markets. And what we're seeing is a broader shift from a lot of publicly traded companies to like private equity is just ballooned. And they are less subject to regulation. Apparently, there was one law that it was going to just require them to disclose just to whoever owns equity in that company, which you would think would be like, yes, like every investor should have that information about the company, like that they're the fund that they've invested in. And apparently it got like it ended up not happening. So it's kind of perturbing to me personally in that we have like this like PE groups are just becoming a greater proportion of the economy overall. I should have put the stats. I didn't know we were gonna talk about this. So but we have less accountability. They're growing increasingly prevalent, and there are concerns that, maybe this ends up being a thing where, because right now you have to be an accredited investor to be making those kinds of investments. So there's this concern of what if people start, maybe there's like some legislation that makes it where people can put their 401ks in these PE firms or what have you, but there's no accountability and there's no oversight as to how those funds are being allocated. So I thought that was just kind of, I know I just touched on a lot of things. I touched on AI, I touched on the prevalence of PE firms, but that's kind of what's been on my brain a bit in terms of the markets and how are things fluctuating, right?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a fine line between, I think, accountability and privacy because, yeah, like in order to be accountable, there needs to be a certain level of transparency. But on the other hand, as investors, you expect a certain level of privacy, and you may be making strategic investments or trading decisions that you don't necessarily want, the general public to know of. So, but I'm with you. I think accountability is really important, especially if you're dealing with other people's money. So
Yeah. No, and that's totally true. Like if you if I was a PE firm, I would obviously oppose the bill too. Like that's only if anything that hurts me, right? There's no pro, so I get why they're pushing against it. But when you look at it from like a like I do think if you own equity in a company, you deserve to know how they're utilizing those funds and what they're spending them on. So
For sure.
I guess it
Yeah.
just depends what side you're on.
Yeah. Yeah. As always. So, all right. Well, should we jump into this week's theme of personal budgeting? And I liked your idea of calling this Mistake Monday and talking about the mistakes we've made in our own personal budgets.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, I think we'll have stuff to talk about on Market Mondays, but I think we can just make up other fun M names, and I've definitely made
Right.
a lot of mistakes with budgeting. So I don't know if, I mean, I could literally just probably do an entire week worth of budgeting mistakes, like episodes, but
What's like top mistake, like number one thing that, if you were like avoid this at all costs.
ooh. Um, I mean, I would almost say like don't discount the small stuff, right? Like, I think that's almost been because I hope when people make decisions on like where they like rent their or buy their home, they're looking at like what proportion of this is set to my income, right? But for example, I was living in New York and my initial apartment was I worked on Wall Street and it was like a really quick 5 minute walk to home. So I would go home to eat every day at lunch, what have you. Like I didn't really think anything of it because when I moved to the Lower East Side, aside from like my subway pass, like I didn't, and I think I had an unlimited subway pass. Anyways, like technically my rent was the same price. So I was like, oh, I'm fine with the same budget. But what happened is now I'm not going home to eat. I'm like occasionally grabbing like a bite out because I forgot to bring lunch, what have you. And I looked at my credit card statement and I also started going out more because when I was living in the financial district, I just like didn't really bother going out as much because I was like, oh, I have to get on the subway, I have to get over there. But Lower East Side, there's so many places to go out around there. So I started going out more, I started bringing lunch less, and I looked at my credit card statement. I was like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Because I just didn't think about like those small lifestyle adjustments that were going to happen with this decision that it seemed like a like for like shift, but it actually wasn't because it affected everything about my day to day.
Yeah, for sure. No, I had something similar when I got my very first job. I was eating out a ton because it was so convenient. There's so many restaurants. I worked in a business district. And once I started budgeting, so I guess my biggest mistake was not budgeting. And then once I did start budgeting, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm spending so much money. Like if I make a sandwich and just bring it, like I can still get out of the office and eat outside, but I don't need to spend, 15, $20 a day just on lunch. So yeah, the lifestyle creep is a very real error and risk.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because I think there's this concept called the slide edge. It's my favorite personal development book, but it talks about how it's like invisible results. It's kind of this idea that like you don't see the big difference. And I think about one of my friends in New York. She was making 10K less than me a year, and she was saving, whereas I was spending. I was not saving any money. And like it's funny because we would do a lot of the same things. Like we would go out and do the same things, but it's those subtle differences of maybe she wasn't buying. There was like a TJ Maxx next to work that I used to frequent, unfortunately. And like she would just but like there were just certain like small changes that she did where she was saving money despite making less. And I was making those subtle, like small decisions where I was making more, but I actually was not saving as much. And I think too, that's like another good piece of advice is like make sure you're like in the habit of saving now because like it's not even I don't know. I remember when I brought it up to my dad, I was like, my friend's like saving money and I'm making more, and I just like I couldn't pay. It was the first month I couldn't pay my credit card in full. And I was like, I couldn't pay my credit card. It was when I moved up to Lower East Side. And he was like, well, you don't make that much anyways, honey. And it's like that is not, I know, bad financial advice.
And harsh.
Uh, I
Uh,
mean, I was young, so I really wasn't making that much money. But I think the thing is like you should just get in the habit of saving and spending less than you earn, because time and time again, I'm obsessed with, it's kind of like my version of like Jerry Springer or the Kardashians, is like Ramit Sethi's Money for Couples. Like I just love listening to people talk about money and their relationship with it. And the thing time and time again is if you are not in the habit of saving and you make more, you will just get in the habit of spending more. And I
right.
never really built that. Like I think I almost use that a little as a crutch, where I never really truly built that savings muscle. And it just getting in the habit now, it makes it so much easier to like build that into your life and just how you approach money.
Well, and to be fair, I think to some extent we come a little bit pre-programmed certain ways. So like I have always been a saver. Like even as a kid when I would get my allowance, I'd be like, okay, I got to save this and I'm going to like keep track of how much I've made. And I don't know that that was necessarily, I mean, my parents weren't like, you need to save your allowance, right? Like that was just me, like that. I felt good when I saved. Um, but with that said, I do agree it's a habit that you can develop and build, even if it's not something you're necessarily predisposed to or have, if you haven't done it in the past. So, yeah, I would agree. I think savings is like should be top priority regardless of how much income you have because it adds up as we've talked about in past weeks.
Well, it adds up, and it, yeah, beyond the whole, I mean, you could talk about compound interest and like all that, but at the same time, beyond that, just the general habit, I think, is so important to build. Um, but yeah, so I think that was a big mistake, was like not factoring in some of the smaller things and the adjustments to my lifestyle that I was gonna have.
Yeah. Well, and I think like bigger picture, thinking about why is budgeting important for the investor mindset. Like you have to establish a baseline that you're going to compare to, right? And if you haven't built a budget, then you don't necessarily have anything to compare to. And so budgeting and savings and prioritizing are all really important aspects of being an investor. And when you're doing a personal budget, that's investing in yourself, which is the number one place to start when it comes to being an investor.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing that you're touching on is uh Ramit calls it like, conscious spending, right? Like you make a conscious spending plan, like being conscious about what are you actually dedicating your money to? Because like you said, like eating a lunch out, you can still just enjoy the same outdoor kind of like break experience with a sandwich from home, and then you can use that money to either develop compound interest, but also maybe it's, hey, you're really passionate about animals. You're going to use it to do something special with your pet, or, like plan a fun date night with your partner. Like there's so many things that you maybe just like are defaulting to spending money on, when you could actually be really conscious about what you're spending money on and say, hey, this actually isn't something I really care about that much. I'd rather dedicate it to like, this seems really cool. For me, it's like travel. Like if like all my money for like travel and unique experiences, I want to dedicate it to that. So for me, I'm not interested in, I love cooking. I eat a ton at home, and I'd rather use, I paid over $100 for dinner on Friday for a friend's birthday. I was like, okay, great example of where like I obviously was going to do that because it was her birthday, but like the people that go out to these restaurants like every single week, I would so much rather like go on a really fun vacation with that money, right? So I think budgeting is about being conscious, with your spending and kind of like figuring out where you want to actually be smart about spending it. A budget doesn't have to just be feel restrictive. It can also feel expansive because you're like choosing to direct your money into more meaningful things.
Oh, I like that. I feel like that needs to be a tagline. Budgeting, expansive, not restrictive. Well, that's probably a good place to wrap up this Market Monday slash Mistake Monday. So tomorrow we'll talk about Topic Tuesday and go a little bit more into why you should build a personal budget. Thanks for joining us on the Finance Files.